Why does it have to be this way? I'm so lonely. I can't bear this emptiness.
If you asked the women in her village when the whispers began, they would all give you different answers. Some would say it started in her 3rd year of marriage, when her stomach remained flat while her mates' bellies blossomed like harvest moons. Others would say it began the day her first husband stopped calling her my flower and started calling her by her name, cold, distant, like a stranger renting space in his house. But if you asked her, she would tell you the whispers started the first time she smiled through tears after another woman's naming ceremony, then went home and bled alone in the dark. Her name was Elira. Chapter 1. Twice rejected, twice broken. There are wounds the body can heal from, and there are wounds that settle deep inside the soul, festering quietly where no eyes can see. Elira carried both. By the time the village began calling her cursed, she had already lived through 2 lifetimes of love and 2 lifetimes of rejection. People saw the silence she became, but they did not see the woman she once was, or the way her heart had been broken piece by piece until nothing soft was left to protect. Her first marriage began like every young woman's dream, warm, golden, filled with promise. When she married Taryn, she believed she was stepping into the life she had prayed for since girlhood. He was attentive, affectionate, proud to show her off. In those early months, he treated her like something fragile and precious, always holding her hand in public, always speaking of the future as though it were already written in their favor. At night, he would lie beside her and talk about the children they would have, boys who would inherit his strength, girls who would carry her gentle eyes. He would rest his palm on her stomach and smile, already imagining life there. Those memories would later become knives she wished she could forget. The first year passed in blissful expectation. Every missed cycle filled her with breathless hope. Every monthly bleeding came with disappointment, but also reassurance from him. He would kiss her forehead and whisper, "Next time." And she believed him, because love made waiting feel bearable. But by the 2nd year, the tone of the house began to shift. Questions replaced patience. His mother started visiting more often, in her eyes always drifting to Elira's stomach with poorly hidden concern. Advice came first: soups, herbs, fertility teas that tasted like crushed bark and bitter roots. Elira drank them all without complaint, desperate to please, desperate to conceive. Soon, advice turned into intervention. Priests were invited to pray over her womb. Elders laid hands on her stomach, chanting blessings that felt more like inspections. Herbalists examined her like livestock, asking invasive questions that made her cheeks burn with humiliation. She endured it all in silence, convincing herself that suffering was part of the journey to motherhood. What she didn't realize then was that she was slowly being stripped of dignity in the name of hope. By the 3rd year, patience had died completely. Taryn no longer spoke of children with warmth. He spoke of them with urgency, then frustration. His touches grew mechanical, duty-driven rather than loving. Nights that once held whispered dreams became scheduled attempts, heavy with expectation and failure. When her bleeding came, he stopped comforting her altogether. Instead, he would leave the room, as though her body's rhythm offended him personally. The cruelty did not erupt overnight. It seeped in slowly, like poison. Sharp comments disguised as jokes, long silences at dinner, the way he stopped defending her when his mother accused her of blocking the family's destiny. The day she overheard them discussing a second wife was the day something inside her first cracked. She had stood behind the door, hands trembling, hearing her worth reduced to the functionality of her womb. Now she waited for him to defend her, to say he loved her regardless. But he said nothing. That silence screamed louder than betrayal. When he brought the concubine home, Elira felt the last piece of her illusion shatter. The girl was young, fertile, everything Elira feared she was not. Yet she swallowed her pain and welcomed her, clinging to the fragile belief that if a child came into the household, she would love it too. She tried to remain kind, tried to remain useful. But 3 months later, when the concubine's pregnancy was announced, the household erupted in celebration that felt like a funeral for Elira's place in it. Songs filled the compound, gifts poured in. Women danced around the pregnant girl, praising her fertility as though she were a goddess. Elira cooked for them all, now smiling politely while her insides collapsed under the weight of comparison. That night she cried alone, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, suffocating grief of someone watching her replacement being crowned. The divorce came soon after, swift and merciless. Taryn did not shout or rage. He didn't need to. His calm dismissal hurt more than anger ever could. Standing before elders and villagers, he declared that his lineage could not be risked on a barren wife. The word barren echoed through the square, clinging to her skin like mud. She felt eyes on her from every direction, pitying, judging, relieved it wasn't them. She wanted to defend herself, to scream that infertility was not a crime. But shame paralyzed her voice. She signed the separation and walked away from the life she had built, carrying nothing but humiliation. On her second marriage came when she least expected it. Jorvin was a widower, older, quieter, a man who had already known love and loss. When he proposed, he did so gently, without pressure or expectation. He told her he didn't need more children, that companionship was enough. For the first time since her divorce, Elira felt seen beyond her fertility. She accepted, not out of passionate love, but out of cautious hope, the kind that trembles but dares to exist. Life with him was peaceful in the beginning. He treated her with respect. His young son grew attached to her quickly, and loving the boy came naturally. She poured her suppressed maternal affection into raising him, braiding his hair, telling him stories, nursing him through fevers. For a while, the village whispers softened again. People thought perhaps fate had simply delayed her motherhood. But time, relentless and unforgiving, passed once more without pregnancy. Years slipped by quietly. No rituals this time, no accusations, just an unspoken awareness growing heavier between them. Jorvin never blamed her openly, but distance crept into his behavior. He stopped reaching for her at night, stopped sharing idle conversations. She felt herself becoming a companion in name only. When he finally spoke, it was gentle, heartbreakingly gentle. He told her she deserved acceptance, but he also deserved the chance for more children. The words were wrapped in kindness, but the meaning cut just as deep. There was no public humiliation this time, no village gathering, just a quiet separation that felt even lonelier than the first. Within a year, he remarried. His new wife conceived before the harvest season ended. That was when the village verdict became final. 2 husbands, 2 failures, no child. Coincidence could no longer shield her. The label cursed settled permanently over her life, spreading through whispers, gossip, and cruel folklore. She stopped attending festivals because conversations died when she arrived. She avoided baby showers because mothers pulled their infants closer when she passed. Naming ceremonies became unbearable reminders of what her body had never accomplished. Isolation hardened her slowly, not into cruelty, but into numbness. She spoke less, smiled less, laughed not at all. The woman who once dreamed of a house full of children now avoided the sound of lullabies. Hope, once vibrant, withered into something brittle and defensive. By the end of it all, Ma Elira no longer believed rejection was temporary. She believed it was destiny. Love, she decided, was a door that had closed twice and would never open again. And so, without realizing it, the woman the world called cursed stopped waiting to be chosen, because she was certain no one ever would again. Chapter 2. The night the monster found her. There are nights when silence feels peaceful, and there are nights when silence feels like the world itself has turned its back on you. This was the second kind. The village slept under a thin veil of moonlight, roofs silvered, lanterns extinguished one by one. But Elira did not sleep. Sleep had abandoned her long ago, chased away by memories, whispers, and the suffocating weight of loneliness that clung to her like a second skin. She lay on her mat staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant laughter of families settling into the comfort she had never been able to keep. Somewhere, a baby cried. and the sound pierced her chest so sharply she had to press her palm against her heart just to breathe through it. That was when she knew she couldn't stay inside another minute. Or if she remained within those walls, she would drown in her own thoughts. So, she rose quietly, wrapped her shawl around herself, and stepped into the night, not caring where her feet carried her, only that they carried her away, away from pitying eyes, away from cruel whispers, away from the life that had rejected her twice and left her hollow. She walked past the last row of houses, past the farms, past the boundary stones that marked where the village ended and the wild began. She did not stop, even when the air grew colder, even when the path narrowed into twisted roots and clawing branches, even when she realized where she was going, the forbidden forest. Every child in the region knew the stories. A cursed woodland where sunlight struggled to reach the ground, where shadows moved when no wind blew, where travelers vanished and were never found again. But the most terrifying rumor of all was that vampires ruled its depths, ancient creatures, blood monarchs, predators older than kingdoms. Women especially were warned never to wander near it, not alone, not at night, not ever. Yet Alira kept walking, because fear requires something to protect, and she felt she had nothing left to lose. If monsters lurked in the forest, let them come. At least death would be quieter than humiliation. The deeper she walked, the more the world changed. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic beneath it, faint but unmistakable. The trees grew taller, and their branches knitting together so tightly they choked the moonlight into thin, fractured beams. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. The silence was wrong. No crickets, no owls, no rustling animals. It was the kind of silence that made the skin crawl, the kind that whispered you were being watched. Alira wrapped her arms around herself, but did not turn back. Her boots scraped against stone as she stumbled into a clearing she did not remember from childhood warnings. At its center stood an ancient altar, carved from black stone veined with silver lines that pulsed faintly under the moon. It looked older than the forest itself, older than memory. Drawn by exhaustion more than curiosity, she walked toward it slowly, her breath uneven, her body trembling from both cold and emotional collapse. At the moment she reached the altar, her strength gave out. She fell to her knees, then forward, palms hitting the cold stone. The chill seeped into her skin instantly, but she didn't move away. Instead, she broke. All the tears she had swallowed for years poured out in violent, shaking sobs that echoed through the clearing. Her voice cracked as she spoke, not to anyone, but to the empty sky above. I tried everything. Her fingers curled against the altar's edge. I was a good wife. I was patient. I prayed. I bled. I begged the gods. Her breathing hitched violently. Why was it not enough? Her tears splashed onto the ancient stone, disappearing into its surface like water into sand. The wind died completely, not slowed, stopped, as if the forest itself had gone still to listen. Elira didn't notice at first, when she was too lost in grief to sense the shift, but the temperature dropped sharply, cold enough that her breath fogged the air. Then came the scent, stronger now, iron, blood, and something darker beneath it, ancient, predatory. Her sobs faltered, slowly, instinctively. She felt it, the presence, heavy, oppressive, watching. Her heart began to pound, not with full fear, but with primal awareness. She was no longer alone. A sound echoed behind her, soft, measured, a footstep, then another, not rushed, not hiding. A predator that knew it did not need to chase prey that had nowhere left to run. Elira's fingers tightened on the altar as she forced herself to turn. At first, she saw only shadow. A tall figure standing just beyond the reach of moonlight, unmoving, but radiating power so dense it made the air feel heavy in her lungs. And then he stepped forward, and the night seemed to recoil. He was beautiful, but not in a human way. In the way storms were beautiful, in the way lightning was mesmerizing even as it threatened to kill. His skin was pale like carved marble, untouched by warmth. His hair fell dark around his shoulders, unmoved by the wind that did not dare touch him. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from her lungs. Crimson, not reflecting light, creating it. Ancient eyes that had seen centuries rise and fall. Eyes that did not look at her like a man looked at a woman, but like a king assessing something rare. His nostrils flared slightly as he inhaled. She felt it, that inhale, like invisible fingers brushing her skin. He was smelling her blood, her fear, her sorrow. But then his expression shifted subtly, curiosity sharpening his predatory calm. Because beneath her blood's scent, he detected something else, something impossibly rare, something that made his pupils narrow with interest. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see faint veins of darkness moving beneath his skin like living shadows, close enough that the cold radiating from him made her shiver. Yet she did not crawl away, did not scream. She was too tired to fear death. If anything, she welcomed it. His voice, when he spoke, was deep, smooth, carrying the weight of ancient authority. You weep on sacred ground, human. The sound vibrated through her bones rather than her ears. She swallowed but did not bow. I didn't know it was sacred. A pause. His gaze lingered on her face, then drifted downward slowly, not lustfully, but analytically, studying, reading, sensing. You are marked, he murmured. Her brows knitted weakly. Marked? He stepped even closer, so close she could see the faint glint of fangs when his lips parted. Moon-marked. The word curled through the air like prophecy. She gave a hollow laugh, shaking her head weakly. No, I'm cursed. The confession came out automatically, worn into her identity by years of repetition. I can't bear children. 2 husbands sent me away because of it. The whole village believes my womb is sealed. For the first time, the Vampire King's expression changed. Not disgust, not pity, but intrigue, slowly, deliberately. His glowing gaze dropped to her abdomen. The air around them thickened. His eyes brightened, crimson light intensifying until it illuminated the clearing in a faint red hue. She felt it then. A strange warmth spreading across her lower belly, as though invisible energy was scanning her from the inside out. Her breath caught. He wasn't looking at her body, he was looking through it, reading her fate like ink written beneath her skin. His pupils dilated, shock flickering across an otherwise immortal composure. Impossible, he whispered. She trembled, anxiety finally piercing her numbness. What? She asked, voice barely steady. What do you see? He did not answer immediately. His gaze remained locked on her womb, glowing brighter, deeper, as though peering into a future no human eyes could survive witnessing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something new. Not hunger, not cruelty, but dark, electrifying fascination. You call yourself Barren. His eyes lifted slowly back to hers, ancient, knowing, dangerous. But your womb, human, a pause thick with suspense, is sealed by destiny, not emptiness. The wind roared back to life violently around them, and Elira realized, with a spike of fear that finally reached her bones, the monster who found her in the forest was not looking at her like prey. He was looking at her like prophecy. Chapter 3. A Proposal Written in Blood. The wind did not settle after his words. It howled through the clearing as though the forest itself had awakened to witness what had just been spoken. Elira remained frozen on her knees before the ancient altar, her breath shallow, her pulse erratic. Not from fear alone, but from the impossible weight of what the Vampire King had said, sealed by destiny, not emptiness. The sentence echoed in her mind long after the crimson glow of his eyes dimmed. She wanted to ask questions, 1,000 of them, but her voice had abandoned her. and before she could gather the courage to speak again, he stepped back into the shadows, as though the darkness itself welcomed him home. "You will see me again, moon-marked," he said, his voice fading into the night like mist dissolving at dawn. Then he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just absence. For a long time, Illyra remained in the clearing, trembling, unsure if she had encountered a monster or the first being who had ever looked at her without contempt. She tried to forget him. For days afterward, she convinced herself grief had made her hallucinate, that loneliness had conjured crimson eyes from shadow and prophecy from madness. But the nights did not let her forget, because he returned. Not every night, but often enough that anticipation began to coil in her chest where fear once lived. He would appear without warning, on rooftops beneath trees, at the edge of fields when she walked alone, always silent at first, always watching before revealing himself. The first time he visited her near the village boundary, she startled so violently she nearly fell. You walk alone often," he observed. She swallowed, steadying herself. "People prefer it that way." He studied her face carefully, not with human curiosity, but with ancient perception that seemed to read the emotional scars beneath her skin. "They shun you." It wasn't a question. She gave a brittle smile. "You already know why." His gaze darkened slightly, but he said nothing cruel, nothing pitying. Instead, he began walking beside her, not touching, just present. And strangely, that presence felt heavier than solitude, yet safer than company she'd known before. Their meetings became frequent. He spoke little at first, but he listened, and that alone began to unravel walls she had built around herself. She found herself telling him things she had never spoken aloud, about her first marriage, the concubine, the public humiliation, and the way villagers looked at her like misfortune given flesh. He never interrupted, never dismissed her pain. Sometimes his jaw tightened subtly when she spoke of cruelty. Sometimes his eyes burned brighter when she spoke of rejection. But he never once looked at her with disgust. It was the first time she had spoken her wounds without feeling ashamed of them. And that terrified her more than his fangs ever could. Word spread quickly in a village starved for gossip. People noticed the tall shadow that appeared near her at dusk. They saw glowing eyes watching from rooftops when she walked home. Livestock found drained of blood in fields near her house. Fear twisted rumors into certainty. They said a demon had claimed her, that her barrenness had attracted dark spirits, that she now consorted with monsters because humans had rejected her. The children ran faster when they saw her. Women spat when she passed. Men made protective signs over their chests, but none of them dared confront her when he was near, because predators recognize greater predators, and the vampire king did not hide his presence when she was threatened. One evening, a group of drunken men cornered her near the market outskirts, emboldened by numbers and cruelty. They mocked her loudly, calling her cursed, empty, worthless even to monsters. One reached to grab her arm. He never touched her. A blur of shadow moved faster than sight. The man was thrown across the road, slamming into a wall with bone-shattering force. The others staggered back in terror as the vampire king stepped from darkness, eyes blazing like twin wounds in the night. His voice was no longer smooth. It was lethal. "No, touch her again," he said softly, "and I will drain this village dry until not a heartbeat remains." No one doubted him. They fled. From that day forward, no one harassed her openly again. Fear replaced mockery. And for the first time since her divorces, Illyra felt protected. Not pitied, not tolerated. Protected. It was weeks later when he finally took her to his world. He did not ask at first. He simply appeared outside her home one night, extending a pale hand toward her. "Come," he said. She hesitated, heart racing, instincts clashing between caution and trust. "Where?" "My castle." The word alone sent a shiver through her spine, yet she took his hand, and the moment her skin touched his, the world dissolved, the air warped, the ground vanished. Darkness swallowed them whole before reshaping into towering obsidian halls, lit by crimson chandeliers and moonlight pouring through impossible windows. His castle was vast, ancient, carved from black stone veined with silver like the altar where they first met. It was beautiful in a way that made human palaces look temporary, but it was also terrifying, because every shadow moved like it was alive, and every distant figure that bowed to him had the same glowing eyes. She realized then, he had not taken her to visit his world, he had taken her into it. They stood alone on a high balcony overlooking a kingdom that did not sleep. Alira's hands trembled slightly as she stared into the endless night beyond. "This is your home?" she whispered. "It is now yours as well," he replied calmly. The statement unsettled her more than comforted her. The silence stretched between them, heavy, intimate, inevitable. She knew why he had brought her here, and the weight of what she needed to say pressed against her ribs until breathing felt difficult. Slowly, she turned to face him. Moonlight illuminated his features, sharp, immortal, unreadable. Her voice when she spoke was fragile but steady. "There's something you must understand before whatever this is goes further." He did not move, but his full attention settled on her like a cloak. She swallowed, her hands clenched together to stop their shaking. "I can't have a child." There it was, the truth that had destroyed 2 marriages, the truth that had turned love into rejection. She forced herself to keep speaking, even as shame tried to choke her. "2 husbands cast me aside because of it. I've done rituals, herbs, and prayers. Nothing worked. If you think I can give you heirs, I can't." She waited, for the disgust, for the withdrawal, for the polite dismissal she knew too well. Her heart pounded violently in the silence that followed. Then he smiled, not mockingly, not cruelly, but slowly, knowingly, like someone hearing confirmation of something they already understood. He stepped closer, lowering his face slightly toward hers, crimson eyes glowing softly in the dark. "I know," he said. Her breath caught. Before she could react, he lifted a pale hand, not touching her yet, just hovering near her stomach. "I told you before, your womb is sealed, not empty." She stared at him, confusion and fear colliding. "You say that like it's not a curse." "It is not." His gaze deepened, ancient, certain, unshakable. And then he spoke the words that would rewrite her fate forever. "I've got enough for us both." The sentence landed like thunder in her chest. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. He continued, voice low, deliberate, filled with something far more intense than pity. "I do not seek a human heir, Elira. I seek the one prophecy marked, the moon-sealed queen whose womb can bear what no mortal woman can." Her heart stumbled. This wasn't charity, wasn't sympathy, wasn't desperation. It was destiny. He lowered to one knee before her, an immortal king bowing to a woman the world had discarded. "I am not asking out of kindness," he said. "I am asking because I desire you, because fate bound you to me long before you were born." His eyes locked onto hers, burning, possessive, unwavering. "Marry me, moon-marked. Rule beside me. Oh, let the world that rejected you kneel instead." Her mind reeled. Marriage? To a vampire king? To a creature feared in legends? Terror curled through her veins. Yet beneath it, something warmer stirred, something dangerous. Hope. She had been unwanted by men, discarded by families, shunned by society. Yet here knelt the most powerful predator in existence, asking not for her womb, but for her. Fear and longing warred violently inside her chest, because saying yes meant stepping into darkness forever, but saying no meant returning to a world where she was nothing. And as she stared into the crimson eyes of the king who saw destiny, where others saw emptiness, Elira realized the most terrifying truth of all. She wanted to say yes. Chapter 4: Queen of the Night Court. The night she entered his kingdom as more than a guest, the world itself seemed to shift to acknowledge it. Elira did not walk into the vampire king's castle this time as a trembling outsider clutching fear in her chest. She entered robed in obsidian silk that shimmered like liquid shadow, escorted by armored guards whose eyes glowed faintly beneath horned helms. Massive doors carved from black stone groaned open before her, revealing the throne hall in its full, terrifying grandeur. The night court was already assembled. Ancient vampires lined the vast chamber in silent rows, blood nobles draped in crimson and silver, their skin pale as moonlight, their gazes sharp enough to cut flesh. Shadow guards stood like statues along the walls, their presence suffocating, yet their loyalty radiating toward one throne alone, and every single pair of eyes in that hall turned toward her. She felt it instantly. Not curiosity, not welcome, contempt. It rolled through the chamber like cold fog, thick, suffocating, inescapable. To them, she was not queen. She was prey, standing where prey did not belong. A human, a barren human, walking beside their immortal king. Whispers slithered through the court like snakes beneath silk. She is the one, immortal, childless, empty. The throne has fallen to pity. The words were hushed, but vampire hearing was sharp, and Elira heard every single one. Her spine stiffened, but she did not lower her head. Not when the king walked beside her. Not when his presence radiated power strong enough to silence entire bloodlines. He ascended the throne steps slowly, and then turned, extending his hand toward her before the entire court. A silent command. Stand beside me. She took it, and the moment her fingers touched his, the hall darkened, torches dimming as though bowing to his will. His voice thundered across the chamber, not shouted yet impossible to ignore. Witness your queen. The words struck the court like lightning. A ripple of shock moved through the nobles, restrained but visible in the tightening of jaws and the flicker of glowing eyes. No vote, no council decree, no bloodline negotiation. He had chosen her, and his word was law older than kingdoms. A crown was brought forth, forged from blackened silver, veined with crimson gems that pulsed faintly like living hearts. Ancient, powerful, feared. He placed it on her head himself. The metal was cold but not rejecting. It settled as though it had waited for her. From the shadows, a ceremonial blade was presented. Without hesitation, the king drew it across his own palm, dark, immortal blood welling instantly. Gasps rippled through the court. He lifted his bleeding hand to her lips. Drink, he commanded softly, not forcing, but binding. The act was sacred, not feeding, bonding, claiming. She hesitated only a heartbeat, then obeyed. The moment his blood touched her tongue, power surged through her veins like wildfire, ancient, electric, terrifying. The court felt it too. A pulse of energy exploded outward, rattling pillars and extinguishing half the torches in the hall. A queen had been crowned, not symbolically, but by blood. Acceptance, however, did not follow coronation. If anything, resentment deepened. Yet the days that followed were thick with tension sharp enough to taste. Vampire nobles bowed when required, but their eyes remained cold. Court gatherings fell silent when she entered. Conversations resumed only after she passed, always in hushed, venom-laced tones. They gave her a name quickly. The empty queen. She heard it whispered behind pillars, spoken through smirks, hissed by concubines draped in silk and jewels. They were ancient beauties, vampire women who had shared the king's bed for centuries before her arrival. Women with hypnotic voices and lethal elegance, now displaced by a mortal they deemed inferior. They did not challenge her openly, but they hunted subtly, lingering too close to the king, brushing fingers across his arm in court, offering their necks in feeding rituals meant for consorts, not queens. Na Elira saw it all, felt every silent comparison, every unspoken doubt, and worst of all, the question that lived inside her too. What if they're right? But the king ended speculation swiftly and publicly. At the next full court assembly, feeding rites were conducted before nobles, a ceremonial act where the king drank from chosen vessels to display power and favor. The concubines presented themselves eagerly, throats bared, eyes gleaming with expectation. He ignored them all. Instead, he extended his hand toward Alira, seated beside his throne. "Come to me." The hall stilled. She rose slowly, pulse racing beneath the weight of watching eyes. He drew her gently onto his lap before the entire court, not crudely, but possessively, reverently. Then he lowered his head to her neck. Now the bite was intimate, deliberate, visible to every noble present. He drank only from her. When he finished, a thin trail of his dark blood sealed the wound, a mark not of feeding, but of bond, a queen's mark. Shock rippled through the court. Humiliation twisted the concubines' faces, and from that night forward, he never drank from another. He did more. He dismissed the concubine chambers entirely, ordered them relocated beyond the inner court, declared that his bed would hold one presence alone, Elira's. The first night she entered his private chambers as queen, anxiety coiled tightly in her chest. The room was vast, draped in dark velvet, lit by low crimson flames, a balcony open to endless night skies. She stood near the doorway, uncertain, overwhelmed. He approached slowly, not predatory, not demanding, gentle, hung in the way only she ever saw him. "You are uneasy," she exhaled shakily. "They hate me. They fear what they cannot understand." "And what if they're right to?" she whispered. He tilted her chin upward, forcing her to meet his ancient gaze. "You are my chosen queen. Their opinions are dust beneath my throne." He lay beside her that night, not touching at first, simply present. A silent reassurance, a king who ruled legions, yet chose restraint with her. Night after night, he remained the same. He did not treat her like a vessel. He treated her like something precious, irreplaceable. For the first time in her life, she felt valued beyond fertility, beyond expectation, beyond function. She felt seen. But fear does not vanish simply because love appears. It lingers, festers, whispers in quiet hours. Weeks passed within the castle, while she learned court customs, vampire hierarchies, ancient laws written in blood and shadow. She walked halls where portraits of past queens hung, all immortal, all powerful, all mothers of monstrous heirs. And every time she passed them, her chest tightened, because she alone had given the king nothing yet. No heir, no legacy, no proof that she belonged on that throne beyond his word. One night, as he slept beside her, his arm draped protectively across her waist, she lay awake staring into the darkness, dread pooling in her stomach. His court obeyed her. His kingdom bowed to her. His heart chose her. But what if her womb failed him too? What if destiny had been misread? What if she remained exactly what the world had always called her, empty? Her fingers trembled as they hovered over her stomach. Fear tightened around her ribs like a cage, because loving him had become easy. But disappointing him? That would destroy what little remained of her heart. And as she lay beside the most powerful king in existence, crowned, claimed, protected, one question haunted her more than all the court's hatred combined. What if I truly cannot give him an heir? And history repeats itself once more. Chapter 5. The Secret of Her Womb. There are nights in the vampire kingdom when the darkness feels alive, not empty, not silent, but watching. Elira began to feel it long before anyone spoke the truth aloud. It started with dreams, not ordinary dreams born from memory or fear, but visions that felt older than her soul. She would wake breathless, her body glowing faintly beneath the sheets, her veins humming with heat that did not belong to human blood. In those dreams, she stood beneath a shattered moon, her hands stained with silver light, her stomach radiating power that bent shadows away from her feet. And always, always, she heard whispers, ancient voices speaking in a language she did not know, yet somehow understood. The sealed womb stirs. The moon Barren awakens. Blood will open what light has locked. She tried to hide it at first. But the castle noticed. Torches flickered when she passed. Shadow guards lowered their heads instinctively, not to her crown, but to something emanating from within her. Even the king began watching her differently, not with doubt, with anticipation, like a storm waiting to break. The truth arrived on the coldest night of the winter moon. She was summoned to the deepest chamber beneath the castle, a place even nobles rarely entered. The descent itself felt ritualistic. Spiral staircases carved from obsidian led downward into air, thick with incense and ancient magic. The walls were etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, not glowing but breathing, as though alive. At the chamber's center stood the royal seer, an immortal older than most kingdoms, blind, yet all-seeing. Her eyes were clouded silver, and her skin stretched thin over bones that radiated power rather than weakness. When Elira entered, the seer turned her head instantly, as though sight was unnecessary. "The moon-marked queen arrives," she whispered, voice echoing like wind through graves. Elira stepped forward slowly, unease curling in her stomach. The king stood behind her, silent, immovable, watchful. "You sent for me?" Elira asked softly. The seer smiled faintly, not warm, but knowing. "No, child. Your womb summoned me." The words struck like thunder. Elira's breath faltered. "My womb?" The seer lifted a skeletal hand, gesturing for her to come closer. When Elira did, the air thickened immediately, charged, electric, ancient, and the seer's palm hovered inches above Elira's stomach, never touching. Yet the queen felt heat surge beneath her skin, as though her body recognized the ritual. Then the seer gasped, not gently, violently. Her blind eyes snapped wide, glowing with blinding silver light. "The legend lives," she breathed. The chamber darkened instantly, shadows bowing inward as if drawn to the revelation. Elira's pulse roared in her ears. "What legend?" she whispered. The seer's voice dropped into something deeper, older, like prophecy speaking through flesh. Before vampires ruled the night, before humans walked the day, there existed a bloodline sealed by the moon itself. Ancient symbols ignited across the chamber walls as she spoke. They were called the Barren of Light. Elira's heart slammed against her ribs, wanting women born with wombs locked by celestial magic, not empty, but sealed, untouchable by mortal seed, unawakened by human flesh. Her knees weakened slightly. "All my life, they said I was cursed." "You were never cursed," the seer interrupted sharply. "You were protected." Silence swallowed the chamber. The seer's glowing eyes remained fixed on Elira's abdomen, as though watching galaxies move beneath skin. "Your womb was sealed, so no mortal man could touch what it was destined to carry." A tremor ran through Elira's body. "Carry what?" she asked faintly. The seer's lips parted slowly. "Immortal heirs born of dual dominion, light and blood, moon and night, human soul and vampire power." The chamber shook lightly, reacting to the words themselves. Elira staggered back a step. No, that's impossible. I was barren. I tried for years." "With men," the seer said calmly. Her blind gaze shifted slightly, toward the king behind her. "Human seed cannot awaken a womb sealed by celestial law." The realization crept in slowly, terrifyingly. Elira turned her head toward the vampire king. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with ancient confirmation. The seer continued, "Only one bloodline can break the seal." Elira's voice came out barely audible. The seer nodded. "The blood of the vampire king carries primordial darkness, the only force powerful enough to merge with moon-sealed light." Elira's stomach tightened instinctively. "You mean I'm not barren at all?" The seer's smile widened, reverent, almost fearful. "No, Queen of Night." A pause thick with gravity. "Yeah, you are the most fertile vessel fate has ever hidden." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Every humiliation, every rejection, every whispered curse had never been evidence of emptiness, but of divine sealing. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. All those years of shame, all those nights of self-hatred, all wrong. Tears burned her eyes, but they did not fall, because the seer had not finished. "There is danger," the seer said softly. The symbols on the walls dimmed slightly, as though bracing for darker truth. "If you conceive, the child will not be ordinary." Elira swallowed hard. How powerful! The seer's voice dropped into a near whisper. Powerful enough to unite night and celestial light, or destroy the balance between them. A chill colder than death slid down Elira's spine. "No, the child will carry dominion over blood, shadow, and lunar force. A being rival clans will either worship," her tone darkened, "or fear enough to kill." The king stepped forward slightly then, protective instinct radiating like a storm. "Let them try," he said coldly, but the seer shook her head slowly. "The threat is not distant, my king. They already sense the seal weakening." As if summoned by the warning itself, the chamber torches flickered violently. In Elira's mind, flashes erupted, visions not her own, armies of rival vampires marching beneath torn banners, assassins cloaked in silver weapons, blood rituals meant to erase unborn heirs before conception could occur. She gasped, clutching her stomach. "They'll come for me." "Yes," the seer said gently. "Nah, because if you bear this child, no throne in the vampire world will remain uncontested." Silence followed, heavy, suffocating, inescapable. Then came the final truth. "You must choose, moon-marked queen." The seer lowered her hand. "You can remain sealed, childless, safe within your crown." A pause. "Or allow the king's blood to awaken your womb, and risk death for yourself and the heir you may carry." The weight of the decision settled instantly on Elira's chest. She turned slowly toward the vampire king. He did not speak, did not pressure, but his eyes held fire, not of expectation, but of destiny waiting for her consent. Her hand trembled as it rested over her stomach. All her life she had longed for motherhood, wept for it, bled for it, been destroyed for it. When now fate offered it back, but wrapped in danger powerful enough to start wars, safety or legacy, peace or prophecy, remain the queen who survived, or become the mother who could reshape immortality itself. And as ancient power stirred faintly beneath her palm for the first time in her life, Elira realized the cruel, breathtaking irony of her fate. She had never been barren. She had been chosen. Chapter 6. Blood Heir. Rising. The night the first assassination attempt came, the moon was bleeding. Not silver, not white, but a deep, ancient crimson that soaked the sky like spilled prophecy. She felt it before the blades arrived, a tightening beneath her navel, a pulse that did not belong to her own heartbeat. Something older, stirring, watching. The queen of the night court stood alone on the obsidian balcony, her hands resting over her womb, not in fear, but in instinct. The wind that moved through the vampire citadel did not touch her skin. It circled her, revered her, whispered in a language her bones somehow understood. Then the shadows moved wrong. Shadow guards were meant to obey the throne. They were born from the king's will, creatures of smoke, fang, and sworn loyalty. But these shadows split, twisted. You reformed into assassins wrapped in cloaks, woven from grave dust and cursed silk. She did not scream. By the time their poisoned blades lunged forward, the vampire king was already there. He did not arrive as a man. He arrived as wrath. His eyes were no longer gold, but abyssal black, devouring light. His fangs elongated, his veins glowing like molten silver beneath his skin. The feral form, the ancient predator he buried beneath centuries of rule, had risen. He tore the first assassin apart with his bare hands. No weapon, no hesitation. Blood rained across the marble balcony, hissing like acid where it touched the sacred stone. The second tried to strike her womb directly. The king's roar shattered every window in the eastern tower. He moved faster than sight, not blocking the blade, but catching it between his teeth. and the poison meant to end an immortal lineage dissolved on his tongue. He smiled while crushing the assassin's skull. Not a king's smile, a beast guarding its mate. When it was over, he turned to her, trembling, breath ragged, feral instincts still clawing through his restraint. His gaze dropped to her stomach, and for the first time, fear touched him. Not fear of losing power, fear of losing her. He knelt before her then, not in ceremony but in vow, pressing his forehead to her womb as if listening for a voice beyond mortal hearing. "My blood will burn the world before harm reaches you," he swore. But the attacks did not stop. They escalated. Poisoned blood was slipped into ceremonial goblets during the Crimson Feast, an elixir designed to rot both womb and soul. She lifted the cup, and the liquid inside recoiled from her lips, it curdling into ash before contact. The court gasped. Blood did not reject vampires, but it rejected harming her. The royal seer later whispered why. "The womb of prophecy cannot be slain by lesser venom," she said. "It answers only to destiny, or to divine ruin." Then came the darkest assault. A rival vampire queen, elder, exiled and drunk on forbidden magic, infiltrated the night court beneath a cloak of eclipse mist. She did not attack the throne, she attacked the womb. The ritual was performed from afar, a grotesque spell woven with bone dust, stillborn ashes, and the names of barren queens throughout history. The curse sought to collapse her womb inward, to seal it eternally before the heir could awaken. She felt it at midnight. No, a tearing pain that was not physical, but spiritual, like claws reaching into the unseen chamber of her soul. She collapsed in the king's arms, her scream echoing through realms beyond the living. The torches in the castle extinguished simultaneously. The moon disappeared. Even the stars hid. The king lost control, not rage, not fury. Something older. His feral transformation this time was catastrophic. Wings of shadow tearing from his back, horns of ancestral bone forming along his crown. He was no longer merely king. He was the first vampire's descendant, a primordial sovereign. He tracked the curse through bloodline resonance, following it across mountains, crypt seas, and cursed forests until he reached the rival queen's lair. No army marched with him. He went alone, because what he intended was not war. It was eradication. By dawn, like the rival queen's entire lineage had been erased, her castle reduced to a crater of black fire, her name forbidden from being spoken in any vampire tongue again. When he returned, still covered in ancient ash and enemy blood, he found her alive, but changed. The curse had failed, not because she resisted it, but because something inside her had answered, awakened. 3 nights later, it happened. She was standing before the mirror of origins, an artifact that revealed true essence beyond flesh. When her reflection moved without her eyes glowed first, not red like vampires, not human brown, but luminous silver, like twin moons submerged in water. She staggered as heat surged through her veins, not burning but transforming. Her heartbeat slowed, then synchronized with another rhythm entirely, a second pulse, inside her. When the king felt it from across the castle, he appeared instantly, breath halted, terror and hope colliding in his expression. She took his hand and placed it over her womb. The moment his palm touched her, the entire chamber erupted in celestial darkness, constellations flickering across the walls, ancient runes igniting along the floor. He heard it then, not a sound, a presence, their child's power stirring like a sleeping god beneath cosmic waters. "She has conceived," the royal seer whispered, appearing behind them, voice trembling. "The air of night rises." Pregnancy did not come gently. It came like ascension. Her cravings began with blood, not hunger but necessity. Ordinary nourishment no longer sustained her. Only the king's blood could soothe the growing force within her. He gave it willingly, every night, in a sacred ritual, his wrist to her lips, not in dominance, but devotion. As she drank, her body changed. Her skin developed an ethereal glow beneath moonlight. Veins shimmered faintly like starlight beneath frost. Her senses sharpened beyond vampire range. She could hear heartbeats through castle walls, feel emotional currents in the air like tides. Her dreams were no longer dreams. They were visions. She saw her child cloaked in shadow fire, walking unharmed through sunlight, commanding creatures older than vampirism itself. Power radiated from her presence now, not aggressive, but sovereign. The court felt it immediately. The same nobles who once whispered, "Empty queen," could no longer meet her gaze without bowing, not out of duty, out of instinct. In even ancient blood nobles, beings who had not knelt in millennia found their knees bending when she passed. Because she was no longer merely queen. She was becoming something mythic. Her womb was not carrying a child. It was carrying evolution. One evening, during the Obsidian Assembly, she entered the throne hall beside the king, her hand resting over her stomach, her silver eyes glowing softly in the torchlight. No herald announced her. None needed to. The shadows themselves parted to make way. Every vampire present, nobles, concubines, generals, elders, fell to their knees in perfect unison. Silence ruled the hall. Then the High Elder spoke the words history would never forget. "The Barren Queen is barren no more." He lowered his head to the floor. "Now we kneel before the Mother of Night." The title spread like wildfire across realms, through vampire courts, rival clans, even mortal occult circles. Mother of Night, bearer of the blood air, womb of immortal dawn. Yet despite the reverence, fear lingered. Not within the court, within her. Late at night, when the king slept with his arm protectively draped over her, she would remain awake, staring at the canopy of carved bone above their bed, feeling the child move, not like a human infant, but like a coiled force adjusting galaxies inside her. She would whisper into the darkness, "What are you becoming?" And sometimes, the shadows in the room would answer, not in words, but in protective stillness, as if the entire night itself had sworn allegiance to the life within her. One such night, the king stirred, sensing her unease. He pulled her closer, placing his hand over hers on her womb. "You fear the power," he murmured. "I fear losing myself to it," she admitted. He tilted her chin until their eyes met, his ancient, hers glowing with unborn starlight. "You were never empty," he said softly. "You were sealed, preserved, chosen." His hand tightened protectively. "And now, the universe has opened inside you." She leaned into him then, no longer the unwanted human queen, no longer the whispered shame of the court. She was the vessel of prophecy, the woman death itself had failed to touch. As dawn threatened the horizon, the castle bells rang, not in alarm, but in reverence. Because across the night court, every oracle, seer, and blood priest had awakened from the same vision, a child crowned in shadow and light, standing between worlds, while vampires, mortals, and ancient beings alike bowed, and at the center of it all, her, no longer barren, no longer doubted, but risen, feared, and worshipped as the Mother of Night. Chapter 7. I've got enough for us both. Final emotional payoff. The night she went into labor, the sky turned crimson again, not in warning this time, but in fulfillment. The moon hung low and swollen, dripping red light across the towers of the night court, as if the heavens themselves had come to witness prophecy breathing its first cry. Her pain was not mortal. It was cosmic. Every contraction felt like realms shifting, like ancient doors opening within her soul. The castle trembled, torches bowing, shadows gathering in reverence outside the birthing chamber. The king never left her side, an immortal who had faced wars, massacres, and centuries of bloodshed, yet nothing had ever made him tremble the way her pain did. He held her through every wave, letting her crush his hand if it eased her suffering. Then, beneath the bleeding moon, destiny arrived. Not one cry, but two. Twins, born moments apart, yet carrying energies so different the air itself split to receive them. One child radiated sovereign darkness, calm, vast, commanding. The other shimmered with luminous nightlight, balance, wisdom, unearthly grace. The prophesied rulers of two realms. The chamber fell silent. Then the impossible happened. The vampire king wept. Tears, ancient, sacred, and long buried, fell freely down the face of a ruler who had not cried in centuries. He held the twins with reverence, like a man cradling galaxies in fragile human arms. Word spread beyond the night court, beyond vampire territories, reaching even the small human village she once called home, and the same villagers who had cursed her womb, mocked her emptiness, called her less than woman, now gathered at the gates of her old town when she returned, not as the rejected girl they remembered, but as the mother of night. They fell to their knees, begging forgiveness. She looked at them quietly, her children in her arms, her crown resting not on her head but in her presence. Children who once ran from her now ran to her, laughing, fearless, reaching for her gown and the glowing infants she carried. Her heart softened, but never erased memory. "I forgive you," she said gently, but her eyes held truth. "I simply remember who I became without your kindness." And that was enough. Years later, peace ruled both night and mortal realms alike. One evening, as twilight bled into starlight, or the king stood on the obsidian balcony holding their twins, one in each arm, while she rested beside him. He watched the children quietly before turning to her, emotion deepening his ancient voice. "You feared you were empty," he murmured. His gaze softened, proud, reverent, eternal. "Yet you carried a dynasty in silence." She leaned into him, watching their children, living proof that love had never depended on fertility, only acceptance. Together they ruled, not as king and useful queen, but as two souls who had chosen each other beyond fear, beyond prophecy, beyond the cruel definitions of worth the world had tried to cage them in. And beneath the eternal night they now commanded, love, and not blood, became the true heir to the throne.